Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Emily Stewart, and I am the Assistant Director of the Duke Human Rights Center at the Franklin Humanities Institute. And we are very excited to be hosting Global Ideas Local Impact, which is the annual celebration of human rights at Duke in the world. And we're grateful to the leadership of the Student Advisory Board and all of the student researchers and alumni participating today. So thank you all. Before we begin, I want to mention over the last year that students from the Native American Student Alliance, staff and faculty at Duke, UNC, NC State, and members of local Native nations have been participating in a land acknowledgement committee. And the purpose of this committee is to center Native students' intentions in creating land acknowledgements and to consult with local Native tribes about the practice of reading them in a university setting. So I want to honor that we're still in this process, and I won't give a formal land acknowledgement now, but invite everyone to learn more about the land you live on and the Native people who currently still live there or who have historically lived there. And I'll just go ahead and post in the chats some information to locate where you live and a helpful guide for creating land acknowledgements. We will not have live captioning tonight, but we will add captions to the video and post it on YouTube sometime next week. So those are coming. There will be an opportunity to ask the alumni questions. So please feel free to send those through the chat to Sarah Kane. And if you have questions about the Duke Human Rights Center or having problems with Zoom, please feel free to reach out to me directly through the chat. I also want to mention that current Duke undergraduates are invited to enter essay or projects related to human rights to our annual Oliver W. Kuntz Human Rights Prize competition. And the Duke Human Rights Center will choose 2 projects and award $500 to those winners. So the deadline is April 1st. So please feel free to send me any submissions, or if you have questions about any of the requirements, please feel free to reach out. Also, if you're interested in learning more about the DHRC or the Human Rights Certificate, I'm also happy to meet with you. So thank you again for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to the DHRC Student Advisory Board co-chairs, Sarah Kane and Lily Levin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. I'm Sarah Kane. I am a senior, and as Emily mentioned, co-president of the Student Advisory Board. Lily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, I'm Lily. I'm a sophomore, and I'm also co-chair of the Student Advisory Board, and I use she, her pronouns. First, we're going to have we're going to bookend the program with a research slam, and then our alumni panel, and then the following half of the research slam. And so we have 4 students who are going to be presenting for the first half before the alumni panel. And so it'll be Elaine, Tiandra, Jamal, and Stephanie. And if you all could just introduce yourselves, your class year, what you're studying, and all of these people are involved in human rights by either studying thesis or research related to human rights in the capstone or in the certificate class. So we'll go ahead and get started with them. And yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourselves. I'll private message you. You have 3 minutes. I'll private message you when you have 30 seconds left. But overall, super informal. And we're excited to hear your presentations. So Elaine, if you want to go ahead. And I know you have slides.
Can everyone see that? Okay. Hi, I'm Elaine Thomas. I'm a senior in the International Comparative Studies Department, and I'm completing a human rights certificate. And so tonight I'm going to be talking about my thesis, which is called Poetic Healing: How Women of Color Express Their Experiences of Exclusion and Care for Themselves. So I looked at the poetry of 4 diasporic women of color living in Eurocentric societies to really ask how they felt othered or excluded in society, and then how they cared for themselves and practiced like self-love and self-care to combat against the discrimination that they experience. So first, I just want to briefly introduce the poets. Nayira Waheed, Orson Shire, Pavana Reddy, and Yersa Daly Ward were the 4 poets that I looked at. I highly encourage you to check out their work. They are really incredible writers. And so I saw that their exclusion manifested specifically in 3 ways. And the first 2 really just dealt with a feeling of disbelonging, both from their imagined homeland or their past ancestral homeland, as well as the new country of residence. And this really was along lines of culture, of feeling accepted, or along linguistic lines. And lastly, a theme that was really prevalent in all of their works was their experience with colorism, which is a societal preference for lighter skin colors that excludes and discriminates against darker skinned women of color. And so I found this really exemplified in this poem from Nayira Waheed titled Bleach. And it really talks about the phenomenon of skin bleaching, which is when people use chemicals to lighten their skin tone, or and it can be very damaging to the skin. So I bolded parts that I felt were really impactful, especially the burn yourself white, it will make me happy, and the ending of her brushing pain and relief into her face, saying the world will leave her alone now. And so I found the work was just really inspiring and impactful in just what they talked about. And I really wanted to know how they healed from this kind of discrimination that they experienced throughout their life. And this poem really showed that self-love was at the center of their ethic of care. Especially, I love myself, the quietest, simplest, most powerful revolution ever. And she ends it with ism without acknowledging a specific form of discrimination, but showing that their intersectional identities really required a kind of ethic of love and care to be able to thrive in a society that didn't accept them or love them. So I really learned so much through looking at all of their poems, especially on the commonality of their experience, despite being from different diasporas and Eurocentric societies. And so if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at elaine.thomas@duke.edu.
Hi, I'm Ciandra Ellison. I'm a senior, double majoring in psychology and African American study, and also pursuing a certificate in human rights. So last year, I was a recipient for the Human Rights Summer Research Grant, where I basically examined the role of school curriculum on racial identity development. And so this presentation will look at some of my findings from that, as well as kind of go into the background for which I approached it. So my work into education derived from me working on the Story Plus Left of Black team in the summer of 2018, where basically I created videos and lesson plans and student activities to help introduce Black studies into secondary education. And so this looked at like the Black barbershop as a space for cultural production and the influence of World War II on Black radical thought and civil rights activism, as well as my work on the University Assisted Community Schools Fast Connections team, which is basically a joint research team between Duke and North Carolina Central University that examines how both universities can help support Durham public schools and engage with anti-racist work and provide resources and support that helps to combat systemic inequalities that impact students' quality of education. So over the summer, because COVID changed up my plans, instead of doing interviews, I basically did a literature review on racial identity development, the Black-white achievement gap, language identity, and Eurocentric school curriculum. And so my analysis revealed that school curriculum serves as a reinforcement of racial inferiority for Black students, as they must assimilate to white culture norms and standards within the classroom and are viewed as inferior, punished, or humiliated when they do not conform to these standards. So that can be seen like the language used in a classroom where teachers tell students to use proper English. And so students are basically, their language and the language of their parents is basically invalidated and seen as like not being right or being inferior within educational spaces, and that reinforces their inferiority, as well as just having testing standards that are based on white populations, and tracking in schools is actually based on standardized testing. And so a lot of times white students are tracked towards higher level courses and Black students are tracked towards lower level courses, which again reinforces racial inferiority of Black students. And so And thinking about the significance of this research, it just demonstrates how harmful our current educational practices are to the development of Black children and supports current work around the benefits of introducing anti-racist pedagogy within our education system and how this can serve to help people unlearn and counteract the psychological effects of white supremacy. And so when thinking about how it has helped students, researchers Colette Chapman Hillard and Valerie Adams Bass created a Black history knowledge measure and found that Black children with greater Black history knowledge had better academic achievement, and this knowledge actually helped them to navigate racial encounters and contribute to better mental health overall for these groups. And that's it for the presentation. So if you want to know more, especially as my project from Mass Connections team, we're in our second year and we're doing some more great work going into our third year. If you want to get connected with us, please, email me. I'll put my email in the chat, can discuss this more. Thank you.
Well, those were both really fantastic, and I won't be as eloquent, but I really appreciate those presentations. My name is Jamal Burns. I am a history major with a concentration in women's sexuality studies, and I'm currently doing a thesis entitled From Bad to Great, Racialized Reform Pedagogy in Juvenile Delinquency in Durham, North Carolina. So very similar to Siandra, I was interested in the ways that the school has constructed specific molds of identity and being, specifically of the Black boy. And I looked at what I deem racialized reform pedagogy, which is a term that I use or that I deploy to describe programs which seek to alter the behavioral mannerisms of Black children, it's specifically Black boys in this case, and kind of instill them with these ideas of white democratic principles. So I start my critique in the 1830s with the way that the juvenile system itself was constructed in North Carolina, very much so along racialized lines. And for a long time in the space, sorry, sorry. For a long time in North Carolina, actually, children were treated in similar ways. Black children were treated in similar ways to white adult male offenders. So the way that their bodies were accosted and physically enacted upon and treated as a criminal subject and with criminal subjecthood created the first programs in these things called homes of refuge, which sought to kind of teach them skills of white democracy. Specifically, they showed them how to they showed them how to root their identity in labor, which I kind of fundamentally made the claim is one of the central tenets of a white democratic process is the exploitation of labor of non-white bodies. And I further look at how these pedagogical models remove themselves from directly criminalized spaces, so juvenile spaces, into actual classroom collegiate spaces. And this sort of thing kind of happened you can kind of trace it through three modes. It began first in the actual juvenile centers, then moved to community-based efforts, which started in the late 1930s, early 1940s, that were partially successful because they were led by Black leadership, but by the end of the 40s, for a lot of different reasons that I can't really explain, the Black leadership kind of denigrated and left. I probably am talking too much. Okay, yeah, and then it goes into the actual school, and there's some different models that happen in school. But if you're interested in knowing more, I'm a much better writer than I am a speaker. You can contact me. I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much for hosting this event. I'm Stephanie, she, her, and I'm an ICS and political science major with the Human Rights Certificate. So like Elaine, I'm also working on my thesis in ICS, and I've had the privilege of reading Elaine's work, and I would really encourage everyone to read it because she's doing really fantastic writing and analysis. So my specific thesis started out with a human rights grant, like Siandra, as she explained last summer. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to start our research projects And mine is entitled The Politics of Memory, the Meaning of Home to Armenian Genocide Survivors. And I look at the period from 1919 to 1991. And my main question is, what would a post-genocide community reference as home? And this is particularly important for Armenians. I can speak for myself. My family was from northeastern Turkey, modern day Turkey. And so the city technically was in Armenia, but we identified as Greeks. And so the question is, well, we were also involved in this genocide, but now what do we call our home now that we've gone through this genocide? And so I look at it from the perspective as a descendant of these survivors, but also through trying to incorporate different methods to holistically evaluate why memory is political, and especially for a community that no longer can go home legally, diplomatically. The state that exists for Armenia today has really no ancestral tie to the community. How do we really approach that? And so my study aims to center Armenian perspectives. And so I look at Armenian political elite, petitioners, and also the survivors themselves in specific interviews with them to create the argument that we can only understand the memory of a home outside of these diplomatic and legal discourses that we typically get in 20th century European studies, and instead need to center the survivors' experiences at the core. So I argue that the Armenian home is a collective memory of resilience rather than a physical, political, or diplomatic negotiation that we classify as Armenia. So kind of flips the narrative of post-World War I statehood attempts, petitioning efforts through the League of Nations specifically to recover their physical homes or to get the state of Armenia outside of the Soviet Union. All of those attempts failed. And it's not just because of these Orientalist perspectives, but it's also because we need to really center the voices of Armenians themselves in their post-genocide survivor interviews. So that's kind of a summary of the project, and I'll put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out. Thank you.
Awesome. Just so great to hear about the incredible work that people are doing, and I would very much like to read everyone's theses because they sound really cool, and I wish I was doing research like that. That's awesome. So now we're going to move into the alumni panel portion of the event. And so first I'm going to introduce our three alumni. So Maria Carnovale is a policy scholar who holds a PhD in public policy from Duke University and a master's and bachelor's degree in economics from Università Bocconi in Italy. Currently, she's teaching at Duke, serving as a technology and human rights fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and as VP of Communications at the Institute for Technology and Global Health. Kyle Knight is a senior researcher in the LGBT rights program at Human Rights Watch. Prior to joining the LGBT rights program, he was a fellow at the Williams Institute of the University of California at Los Angeles School of Law and a Fulbright scholar in Nepal. As a journalist, he worked for Agence France Presse in Nepal and for the UN's Humanitarian News Service, reporting from Burma, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia. He has previously worked for UNAIDS, the Australia Lesbian Foundation for Justice, and in the Children's Rights and Health and Human Rights divisions at Human Rights Watch. He sits on the editorial board of the Annals of LGBTQ Public and Population Health Journal and the advisory group of the Women's Refugee Commission's Sexual Violence Project. He studied cultural anthropology at Duke. Alexandra Weisner is pursuing a Master's of Environmental Management at the Yale School of the Environment, where she is focused on the nexus of climate and conflict from a justice lens. Along with classes, she is currently the coordinator of the People, Equity, and Environment specialization and working for the Council of Environmental Quality for the Office of the President. Before Yale, Alexandra was the Associate Director of the Rachel Carson Council, working on federal energy and forestry policy and Southeastern U.S. energy justice. Previously, she worked on indigenous cultural preservation in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Alexandra is a graduate of Duke University with degrees in environmental policy and certificates in human rights and Latin American studies. So I just really want to invite the alumni first to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and how you started the work you've been doing. And you can go in the order that I introduced you. So Maria, then Kyle, then Alexandra.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for sharing a little bit of information about your work. It was great to hear, and all the presentations were incredibly interesting and very informative. So about me and how, my path from school to where I'm now is not a path that is that long, actually, because I graduated from my PhD in 2019, so a couple of years ago. And as Sarah was mentioning, my background is in economics. And during my master in economics, I had the opportunity, the privilege to do an internship at the Human Rights Council in Geneva. That was very important for me because that was the opportunity for me to see how I could apply the things that I was learning in class, the things that I was learning during in my education, to something different, to some problems that I had encountered throughout my education. So that was, I think, really important for me. And another reason why I realized that was an important experience is that, well, there at the Human Rights Council, the majority of the people that I met were lawyers. So there was this constant interaction with people that were from a field that was different than mine, that spoke a language, a jargon that was different than mine. And so it was a little bit of me adapting to them, but also them adapting to me. And so discovering how that communication across field happens and how that creates more, creates a better understanding of the issues that are considered. I think it was very important for me to experience. And that was one of that experience motivated me to actually pursue the PhD in public policy. After my PhD, I did a postdoc like many PhDs do. And then I joined, came back to Duke, and finally had the opportunity to join the Harvard Kennedy School as a fellow, which is what I'm doing now. And the research that I am doing with the Kennedy School is I'm looking at policies related to surveillance technology, initially mostly related to facial recognition, and now more and more, especially after the March 2020, related to digital contact tracing. And if any of you wants to know more about this research and wants to get in touch, feel free to do so. And I would be very happy to talk more about either your research or to let you know what give you a better sense of what I'm doing. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Someone nods, I'll take that. Okay, awesome. Hi, y'all are really impressive. I can't wait to hear the next presentation. So I'll start by saying I live in downtown Durham. If anyone wants to talk about your projects or careers working in human rights, I am more than happy to get together in the coming weeks and months as it gets nicer and more pleasant to sit outside in a safe way. So thanks for having me here. I think whenever I hear that ridiculous bio read out loud that was written by our marketing department, it sounds way more interesting than it is if I just reflect on it. I think, one of the things that I hope I can offer tonight, and again, if we follow up in other conversations, is a slightly less glossy picture of what it's like to have a career in this industry. Just listening to Maria now reminded me, I failed the LSAT. Like, I really wanted to be a human rights lawyer and I just tanked. I mean, they basically sent it back and were like, don't bother applying to law school. And, that sucked. I put a lot of time into getting ready for it. And it was quite a blow to the ego as well, especially because at the time I was working at an organization that was primarily staffed by lawyers. And I really thought this was the only way to gain some legitimacy in this space and do this work that I really grown to care about. Not true, it turns out. There are other ways, and I won't take up too much time talking through all of them here, but please feel free to ask me questions along those lines as well. The other things I'll just say is I think connecting back to what my experience at Duke was like and going into this type of work, I think there were two things that I really, really value. One was a sense of curiosity, and I give a lot of credit to the Cultural Anthropology department for doing that. There were just such amazing classes and classmates and really, really challenging topics that were just fabulous and really changed the way I think over and over again. And I look back on it with just incredible admiration and gratitude. And the other was all of the work study jobs that I had, which were frankly way more relevant to my entry-level employment in this field than anything I learned in the classroom. My first jobs were always as administrative assistants. Even now when I work on teams, I just published my latest report with 2 scholars, a medical anthropologist and a sociologist, and my biggest contribution to the whole thing was staying organized and coordinating the whole research procedure, because no offense to them, but that was not their strong suit in what they did. And so, don't forget and don't sort of bury these other experiences and skills that you build up over time, because they are really, really, really valuable. I don't think any industry, including the human rights industry, values them nearly enough. We look down on people who say, that's just admin, that's just court. No. Nothing happens without that stuff, without the glue that holds it together. And I still feel that my greatest contribution to the stuff that I work on is often the skills I learned through those types of jobs. So I'll stop there, but look forward to your questions now or later. I'll put my email in the chat as well.
Wow, following all of that up is not something I wanted to do, but it's just so fantastic to hear first all of the incredible studies that everyone is doing, and then the incredible work that my fellow 2 panelists. I'm really honored to be here today. I'll be frank, I think where I'll give the most help or benefit is I'll be really frank and honest. I'm about 3 years out, which feels crazy to say, from my graduation from Duke University. And in some ways, I really feel that I'm in a similar spot to a lot of you all. In coming back to graduate school, I have in many ways kind of attempted to restart my focus and reinvigorate my focus in human rights and my grounding in human rights, honestly, that I started back at Duke. And it's been really fantastic, especially as I head into work that is incredibly mired with language that is heavily securitized and with many people who are excluded from the conversation when you're looking at climate and conflict work. Most of my work, quite frankly, has been heavily in the climate space or environmental space, which, as we all know, and I'm happy to post some reports on this, is far too white. And I'm happy to also talk more about why I think that is. And it's led to, I think, a lot of difficulties and issues. And I think probably the biggest benefit that the certificate gave to me is this amazing grounding to be able to ask the questions about who's in the room and what's being discussed, and why the decisions we're making are the decisions we're making. And it has been really impactful in my career, and not in those big, powerful ways that, oh, I passed these amazing policies, but rather in those smaller interactions with communities on the ground. And in a lot of ways, that's been incredibly beneficial. And so I think too, when you're looking at your human rights certificate, know that it can be, even if it's not your direct field that you go into, it's such an important and vital grounding to have. And it's just actually, been this really unique, surprisingly, and fantastic grounding that I've had in graduate school that many others do not. So I'm really, really happy to kind of speak towards that, talk to you very honestly about what it's like going into the job market, and talk to you also about graduate school or other options that you may be considering. I guess I never really took a standardized test because some graduate schools, as I believe they all should not require standardized testing. So I can't talk too much about that, but I agree with Kyle in that there's so many options for your careers and so many options for what you can do, and don't feel stifled by anything or by seeing people who have certain qualifications for their careers, and you may not know that you still have an important space to hold, especially as a young person in this space. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. So now we're going to start the Q&A portion. And I'll start with a question, but if you have any questions that you'd like to ask either everyone or one person in particular, please send me a direct message and I will ask your question. So the one I'm going to start with first is, how did you prepare yourself, or how are you continuing to prepare yourself for your fields of work? You know, this could be experiences, programs, your education, things like that. It would be a good place to talk about human rights certificate, Ali, anything like that.
So since you mentioned me, I think obviously being in school, one of the bigger things that I'm doing is really trying to remember that even though in graduate programs you are a bit more specified than you necessarily may be in a undergraduate major or minor, I'm really trying to continue to recognize the intersectional nature of the work that I'm in by taking courses. And a lot of graduate school schools will allow you to do so, but by taking courses in other graduate schools like public health or the International Jackson School of International Studies and the law school, and really focusing those other classes on practitioners who are teaching. So those people who have been in the field and who really understand what it's like to work, particularly on these issues of justice, so that I can continue to understand the right questions that I should be continuing to ask. I think a lot of times people come into graduate school and undergraduate thinking that they have to get all of these hard skills, quote unquote. But I think that in and of itself is minimizing of things that might be called soft skills, but are just as important, if not more important, particularly those that are interpersonal and those that are bringing voices into the room that would not otherwise be there. And that is not always considered a hard skill. And they can be difficult to talk about and difficult to pitch yourself on, but I encourage you to really just rethink that framing in all that you do.
I'm in graduate school right now as well. That makes a difference. So I'm in a master's in public health program, which I started part-time a few years ago at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I would highly recommend thinking way outside the box. I wish I had done this years ago. It's works for me. There was no entrance exam, and it's about a fifth of the price of an MPH in the US. And they've been doing long distance education since before the internet, not just since before Zoom. So it actually is really doable while working, and obviously became a bit more relevant this year. My organization at Human Rights Watch doesn't have a health and human rights team. We closed it down a few years ago for budgetary reasons. So when the pandemic hit about a year ago, those of us who were somewhat engaged in the public health field got mobilized. So I'm about 50-50 between the LGBT program and our non-existent fake ad hoc health program now, which has been really, really interesting to engage on it while also a student. But yeah, I can't encourage you loudly enough to think outside the box when it comes to continuing your education, gaining those soft skills. You know, one of the things, now that I'm on the other side of the interview table, I'm 13 years out from my time at Duke. I see just incredible people come in and apply for our fellowships and our researcher positions and stuff like that. And on paper, they're just fabulous and really, really good. And then we get to the point in the interview where we say, okay, about 60% of this job is interviewing people about really traumatic human rights violations that they've survived. Can you tell us about a time when you've done that? And they just freeze, and they've never done it. and they can't think of a way that they've engaged with people in that way. And I think the ones, I mean, it's heartbreaking in a way that they haven't, you know, because otherwise they have a lot of the other component parts of the job. But I think one of the things that also can be a little frustrating is I actually think a lot of people have done it, right? They just haven't done it in a way that they think it ticks that box. You know, we had a really interesting interview participant a while back who had spent years working at a suicide prevention and crisis hotline. And that's a very similar thing. You're not documenting human rights abuses, but you are engaging people at a time of extreme tenderness and trauma, and you are trained to do that, and that is a relevant skill. So think outside the box in terms of what you seek, but also in terms of what you've done. Like, take credit for what you've accomplished and the skills you've gained along the way. And don't just think like, because a job calls for one very specific thing in the way we write our job descriptions, that you don't apply, you don't have skills that apply. You know, you don't have to have absolutely everything to dive into a position or to try for it. But also, like, be generous with yourself and try to interpret some of the stuff that you have done and you have been exposed to in a way that is applicable, because that's how we enrich our staff and that's how we get better at what we do over time, as people bring in sort of a genuine diversity of experience.
If you can just jump off of that, it's one of the things that I notice is that we tend to have an idea of, in order to get to that point, I need to do A, B, and C so that I can get to E. So we have this kind of linear model of how a career trajectory is supposed to be. But that is a very flat way to think about, I think, your career. In part of because of what Kyle was mentioning before, a lot of that is just serendipitous, like it's things you cannot predict. But it's also because if everybody thinks that in order to get to point E, you need to pass through the different milestones, and everybody passes through the same milestones, that makes, you know, everybody has very similar perspectives and experiences. So those detours that seems like detours, it seems like something that it's a waste of time. Actually, it's the one thing that makes you unique. And those detours can be the one thing, as Kyle was mentioning before in his example, that make the difference on the job, because you have gained an experience that really not too many people have. So just, you know, be conscious of there is, I'm an economist, so, you know, there is an efficiency in going the straight line, but at the same time, there is, on a certain level, those detours are the one thing that make you and your professional profile special.
Fantastic. And so I have a question from the audience. So were any of you involved in campus or community activism while at Duke that helps you in your work now?
I feel like I'm way too old to remember specifics. I was a theater kid. I don't remember if I did any, yeah, we did all kinds of weird stuff. Maybe Ali or Maria has a better example. Let me think.
So I think it's split up into two for me. I'm from North Carolina, and so I think, well, my family isn't really from there, and so I think for a long while, until I actually came to Duke, I didn't really know what it meant to be a North Carolinian. And so in a lot of ways, me going to Duke was me really realizing and taking a lot of classes on the history in North Carolina that I think many of the student projects have done a really good job of digging more deeply into. And that's more a personal level activism. And I got very involved with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. I continued to work with them after graduating, would be more than happy to put you in contact with some folks there. And so mine was more on an environmental side with that specifically. As far as on campus, there wasn't anything terribly formalized other than the sit-ins that happened my sophomore year, I believe, junior year, over the Trask incident. And these were sit-ins in the Allen building. I participated in a lot of the protests there. But though I was not a person sitting in, so I will acknowledge that. I think there was just a lot that happened in my freshman and sophomore year that were really egregious incidents of some homophobic writing, some very egregious racism, where students really came out and protested and stood together. Of course, more has occurred, but I think those were in more, it wasn't as organized, and I still have interns, or I had interns this past summer that are now seniors, and they kept me updated on everything going on campus. And I kind of, well, I know it's not enough, and there's a lot that Duke still has to do to reckon with it. I think it's been really heartening to see that the student body, from this outside perspective, has gotten better. And once again, not perfect and not fully there yet, but better since my time. And I think for me, that's progress forward, which is heartening, though once again, not perfect.
So for me, the short answer is no. But when I was at Duke, it was the period where graduate students wanted to organize into unions, like wanted to unionize. And so that was something that kind of I witnessed in a certain way from outside, and in trying to decide what was the best decision in that case. And I think what stuck with me of that experience was the noticing that that process essentially was very strategic from the point of view of the two institutions, Duke and the union that was trying to make that unionization happen. And so, you know, how, for me, what stuck is that idea that again, those, in order for some type of movement to really pick up, to be successful, there needs to be some level of strategic thinking behind that. And I felt that just trying to raise awareness was just not just enough. So I guess that maybe it's a little bit of a pessimistic view, but that is the one thing that I learned from that experience.
Great. So kind of going along the track about Duke, and also what you were mentioning before about, you know, taking less of a straight path and more of a winding path. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what has helped you get from Duke to where you are now, and what advice you would give to current students who may want to pursue a similar path.
So I can just mention one thing about that. So I think a lot of what brings you from point A to point B again is trying, and trying in the sense of like taking your chances. Like for instance, when I was in during my master program, I applied to a program that was extremely prestigious in my university, and I know that other people. And that program worked in a way that you could select, like you were applying to a simple program, and then you had preferences over where you were assigned. And I put as my top preference the most prestigious one. Most of my classmates did not, because, well, they were sure they were going to be rejected anyway, so it was a wasted choice. I actually got selected for that. And some of my classmates were way better than me, at least, you know, on paper. So the reason why I got selected is that nobody else tried. So again, it's sometimes just about taking your chance and trying, and maybe not even believing in yourself, because it's nice if I thought that I was going to get it, but you know, the worst thing that happens is that you get rejected, and so why not trying? So, you know, just take those chances.
I mean, all I add to that is I agree completely. Try, you know, take a chance. Also, do your research as much as you can on different, and that includes having conversations with folks in the field. You know, I my first job, I graduated without a job, and my first job was as an administrative assistant at Human Rights Watch. I don't think I knew what Human Rights Watch did at the time. I was just applying to jobs across like the idealist.org website on all kinds of organizations. And I think I would have done better. It was the 7th time I'd applied for one of these jobs at Human Rights Watch over the course of about 6 months. And this one finally stuck. I think I updated my cover letter and actually had someone proofread it for me and stuff like that. Those little things matter a lot. And I also think there's more information available now than there was 10 years ago. I mean, go look, I just went through a job recruitment process at another organization, and there was just a lot out there. There's reviews online. Glassdoor is like the Yelp of the professional field, and like, you know, take it with a grain of salt, but there's more data to take in. There's more people who are willing to have conversations. And I think you'll find in particular that at least for most of the people I know in this field who really enjoy what we do and are really happy with what we do, we also understand how it can be tricky and sort of obscure and how to get into it. And we're happy to have these conversations. So don't hesitate to do that. I realize reaching out to strangers is not something everyone is totally comfortable with. Certainly not something that I am naturally comfortable with. I think I've gained it over the last decade of doing this type of work. But you can learn a lot in advance of applying to stuff. They might even make you feel like you don't want to do it. And that's also great. You know, you probably saved yourself some time and some angst, or you'll learn about what an organization actually does. And you can then say, oh, okay, well, I don't have any of that experience, but here are some ways I can gain it. That can be really, really interesting. And I'll say this for myself as well as I explore other things I want to do with my career. There's a lot of human rights work out there for which I have no skills, even, 13 years into a career in the field. And, it's partially me learning where those gaps are, what to do. Can I fill them in? Do I want to? Is that interesting? Like, ask some of these questions up front, because all the answers aren't online necessarily, but, you can start digging away and it will save you, it'll make your whole process more enjoyable, that's for sure.
Yeah, even hearing from you two is helpful for me. So I think I really first want to echo the get used to and get comfortable with people telling you no, because you miss 100% of the shots that you do not take, and it is so much better to just try. And so I know we've all said it, but and I think it relates a lot to, imposter syndrome, and I get it, but truly, you all are doing incredible things, and you would be surprised how valuable you can be for an organization or for a grad program or whatever you choose to do in the future. I think another thing is really take an honest look at what you're passionate about. And I understand that there are other factors that go into choosing a job, and I really empathize with that. But I do think if you're able to choose a job that you're passionate about, even if it's work, like being an administrative assistant, where administration may not always be the most fun. I had to do a lot of that in my position as well. So also don't take your title with a grain of salt. But I think if you really care about the work, it doesn't feel like work. And that can really be, really help you along the way. And then I think the final thing, and this is something that was pretty specific to me, but maybe will help some of you, is that when I was at Duke, I was pretty internationally focused. When I went to the Ecuadorian Amazon, I think that really put me in my place. It's unfortunate that I had to do so. I had to leave the country in order to do so, but I think it made me realize that there were a lot of skills that I still personally needed, and a lot of things that I didn't understand about where I grew up and about domestic issues in the US itself, where I speak the language fluently, where I know the culture better, that really indicated to me that I needed to work in an area and a space first that I knew best, and that I was most culturally and verbally competent in before having potentially negative repercussions going into an area where I didn't know the culture as well, and I didn't know who my positionality as well, so who they thought I was as well. And so I think there's a lot of learning that can be done in a classroom, but I do encourage you to think about that when you're choosing the space that you enter for your job and things like that. It's just really putting in the work behind it so that you can have the best impact possible without having unintended consequences or impacts. And I'm happy to also talk more about that and kind of the more personal side of that later.
Yeah, excellent. That's super helpful. And kind of along that note, about, I guess, realizing these things that you don't know and things like that. I'm wondering if there are any specific challenges that you faced in your career that you'd like to share about, as well as how you overcame those.
I mean, I think it actually riffs on, for me at least, what Ali was just saying. I think there's sort of a meta level take on this, and I don't mean to say this as like the dramatic lighting comes into my apartment and makes me look like I'm having my deepest thoughts, but like this is an industry, or this is a type of work, if you're working in advocacy, if you're working in human rights or activism, like you need to prepare yourself that you are probably going to lose more than you win, right, on the stuff you embark on. It is a real uphill battle. We come up with all the metaphors for it, but it can be really hard. You do want to pursue it because you're passionate about it. You do want to find a way that works for you, but it can be kind of a bummer, not to put it lightly. But there is a lot of friction. There are a lot of things along the way, including, and I'm happy to say this in a public forum as long as I'm not getting too specific, including some of the people you work with. Like there are really, really difficult personalities in this field. And you will get into intractable fights over how to phrase something or how to edit something or how to strategize on something. And that's because people are passionate and they happen to disagree with you and their experience push them in a different position. So it can be really, really exhausting. And I think one of the things to do to prepare for that is just to think about it, to embrace it, but also to come up with ways that you sort of handle it yourself, right? And I don't know that I did that particularly well earlier on in my career, probably a little bit blinded by ambition and wanting to kind of get the job that I have now, frankly. And I think the industry has shifted to value it a little bit more. I could list off things that my organization is doing on sort of the technical side to support staff a little bit more, which is great. But I do think some of it comes back to us as professionals to sort of make these values claims about our lives and what we're going into with that baseline understanding that you're taking on some very messy problems, some very, very difficult things. And the likelihood of success, even when, whether you are personally implicated in whatever human rights issue you're working on, or whether it's something you're allying yourself to from your position of privilege within an organization, the likelihood of success is fairly low on a lot of the stuff that we work on. It doesn't mean we stop, but that is something to sort of prepare yourself for, to work on, and to take into consideration as you realistically take on a career like this.
Yeah, I first could not agree more. Just would love to build off that. I think, and this is centered in the work that I was doing politically on the federal level. So I think that's a good understanding before I say what I say. As a recent graduate, you're entering a space where you may not always feel that you have that much power. And in those kind of scenarios, there is a constant personal battle that I felt going on of figuring out where you have enough power to make a change. And I mean, there were many times on the Hill where you know, I would be asked what my age was, or I would be given a hug instead of my hand shaken, or smaller things like that. But ultimately, I was lobbying on an environmental justice bill, and I ended up making the decision to not say anything in those moments because I thought that the work that I was trying to accomplish was more important. That is something that you really, I think I would have benefited hugely if I had grounded myself more, known exactly before I went into it, where are my barriers? Because whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in these bigger power structures, like going into policy work or big business or anything, really understanding kind of where you personally draw the line is important and will really help you through situations that are not ideal. And where you really have to kind of reckon with things. And then I think second from that, within the work I did, there were a lot of moments too where I had to reckon with some of the things I had done or my family had done, or potential implicit biases that I didn't know I had. And I think I'm still doing that. And just really, really, it's hard. It's hard when people tell you about it and to recognize and say, oh my gosh, I was wrong. And wrong in a way that could have hurt someone, even if it was a minor thing. And I think just really trying to keep yourself open to that and keeping those open forms of communication are so, so critical. And I don't know a perfect way of doing so. I'm still working on it, but I think those are two key things that I think I'd wish I'd grounded myself more in before starting kind of my professional career.
For me, I think, so first of all, I agree with everything that was said before, and the point of Ali that, you know, figuring out what are your boundaries and also acknowledging what are the specific barriers that your identity is going to create and how you overcome them. Maybe you're not going to know how to overcome them, but like acknowledging them to yourself is going to be very useful. Because they exist and you're going to experience them, unfortunately. And I think one of the things that I find difficult is, there are mostly two things that I find kind of difficult. One of them is choosing. So it sounds awkward, but there are going to be many projects, there are going to be many opportunities, and you cannot take them all. There is power in being able to say yes to one and no to the other. And I think that is a skill that is very hard to acquire, because when we are presented with the things and we value them very much, being able to say no to one of them, it's hard. And there is a detachment from that it's just hard to process. And so, you know, working on that skill early on, I think it's going to be useful. And another thing I think it's hard is that I feel like at least academia, the academic field, is full of big egos, and managing big egos is really hard. Having to deal with big egos is really hard. There are a lot of people that are going to say their opinions very loud, and that is going to make you think that they are more right because, well, they are loud, they must be right. And yeah, so again, there are a lot of people that talk, not too many people that listen, and that is a challenging situation for everyone. And I don't know how to solve that problem. I don't think I do it well, but that is something that you might want to start to think about.
Well, thank you so much, guys. I wish we could talk for like an hour longer. It's so informative and really interesting to hear. about all of your experiences. So thank you so much. I just want to encourage everyone to give them a little round of applause as much as we can. And so I'm going to pass it back on to Lily to introduce the next portion of the Student Research Slam.
Hi, everyone, again. Thank you all so much for presenting. That was lovely. And now we're just going to go into our last 5 Research Slam students. And again, if you all could just introduce yourselves, what year you are, and what you're studying, that would be wonderful. And you'll have 3 minutes to present. So we'll have Catherine, then Erin, then Liu, then Sarah, and then Maria. And yeah, so we can go ahead and get started. Catherine, if you want to start, thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Catherine, and I'm a junior studying public policy in ICS. Tonight, I'm going to be presenting on my project called A Test of Values, an exploration of U.S. national values at the U.S.-Mexico border. So my interest kind of started in this, in that my family immigrated here from Honduras and China. So it's kind of a story very central to me, but has also taken up a lot of my passions in my academic and extracurricular work. So this project is still kind of ongoing, but it's a culmination of a lot of my different experiences at my time at Duke. So my project seeks to address the value conflict at the border by developing a deeper understanding of the border as a physical and symbolic space. And this work allows me to analyze how the United States national values interact within this space and has also been used as justification for horrific immigration policy. So the US has a defined set of core values, which are proclaimed to be liberty, self-government, equality, individualism, diversity, and unity. However, the border represents the pitting of these values against each other. Individualism and self-government seem to conflict with equality and diversity within immigration policy. And especially the Trump administration denoted a dramatic shift in the public's view of immigration policy towards zero tolerance, despite this occurring in more covert ways in every administration. So this brought up the question for me, how are our values throughout different administrations being used to uphold structures of power and implement increasingly harsher immigration policy? So I began my work by conducting a literature review on existing research on the development of US national values, their current state, and how these interact within migration policy, while now additionally incorporating relevant information pertaining to COVID-19's disproportionate impact on migrant communities. I did this also speaking to a lot of different border advocacy groups to gain more qualitative data on what the border was looking like during the Trump administration versus in previous administrations. And then as a result of this research-based work, I conducted a comprehensive timeline of US immigration policy through a values-focused lens. And I did a lot of examining the language used in major immigration policy and noting the ways that words like alien, threat, and illegal have been embedded in policy throughout time to criminalize migrants and justify harsh immigration policies. And then at the same time of this work that I was primarily working on last summer, but kind of continuing now as well, I was also working as a live-in volunteer at Annunciation House, which is a migrant shelter in El Paso. So this allowed me to view a lot of personal firsthand accounts because I was primarily working with people who were recently released from detention centers. And so I got to view a lot of the firsthand accounts of the ways the Trump administration weaponized the COVID-19 pandemic against migrants through these personal experiences while also doing my policy research. So I think kind of my conclusions are kind of still going, but while the experiences that I witnessed were often shocking, the policy work reminded me that history has continued to spell it out clear. And while the shock and outrage felt in response by the public to the Trump administration's immigration policy remains so important, we must also continue to acknowledge it isn't new and that racism, oppression, and violence against Latinx populations underscores all of American history and immigration policy. So that's kind of my presentation. And if anyone has any questions on this, you can feel free to contact me at any point. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron. I'm first semester senior. I'm a major in history, political science, and I guess a lot of a minor in Slavic and Russian language and culture. Right now, I'm writing a history thesis about Bob Zellner, who is a white civil rights veteran of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. the militant Black-led student wing of the civil rights movement. So Zellner is a unique figure both within the movement at large and SNCC. He was born in Alabama in 1939. He was the grandson of a lifelong Klansman and the son of a renounced Klansman, which made him an odd choice in 1961 to become the first white Southerner to join SNCC in 1967. He, along with his wife, was the last one to be expelled when SNCC elected to become an all-Black organization. So because of that, I wrote my first paper, which I should say I completed in Professor McLean's class, on Bob Zellner and the tensions that captured him as a white activist in SNCC and the movement. His responsibilities therein were pretty revealing. He was hired as a white student organizer, whose job was to travel across white campuses and organize white students who might be interested. And quickly he found that work boring, he found it fruitless, and he became quickly involved in campaigns for Black liberation. He organized in Danville, Virginia in 1962. He led a campaign in Talladega, Alabama in 1963. And in 1964, he replaced Stokely Carmichael, later became known as Kwame Ture, as the only white field director who ever served during the Freedom Summer in an extremely dangerous place, Greenwood, Mississippi. I left off there, and I plan to pick up with my thesis in four particular directions. First, the support from his family, friends, and mentors that enabled his dissidence. Second, his relationship in the freedom movement to other whites, especially Northern white students. Third, his relationship with Black organizers in the Project of Black Liberation. And then finally, a group he started called Grassroots Organizing Work, GROW, which he started with his wife in 1967 after he and his wife were expelled from SNCC. It's the only white organization which emerged out of SNCC's collapse, and it took it as its mission that white Southerners should organize among themselves to produce a coalition capable of joining Black Southerners, which was the mission that whites were pushed into at that time. So I hope all these threads are kind of going to unify into a useful study, one on Bob Zellner, also of white organizing in and alongside the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the civil rights movement at large. And if you have any questions, you can get me at aaronslutkin@gmail.com. Thanks.
Hi, y'all. It's been great hearing everyone's presentation so far. My name is Liu. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a junior studying public policy and African American studies. And my project is entitled, why am I reading my project? Sorry. The Prison to Pollution Pipeline, looking into prison ecology and the fight for environmental justice for incarcerated populations. My work in incarcerated populations really began this year, doing work around COVID and the election. And I'm currently doing a report along with local organizers in Durham, a part of Southerners on New Ground, about the impacts of COVID-19 in Durham County Jail. And my interest in environmental justice has really been connecting with that passion as well. And activism has been a central part of my research. And really what I'm looking into is prison ecology, which was coined by the Human Rights Council to identify the common, unique, and connected toxic traits of prison systems in the United States. And really a lot of the difficulty is around the disregard of incarcerated populations as a heightened risk category in environmental justice. They are not included within environmental justice guidelines by the EPA. Prison systems have not been regulated by the EPA, Department of Justice, or state departments of corrections. And a lot of my work is around why incarcerated populations, despite being disproportionately Black communities of color, also disproportionately incarcerating LGBT plus folks, is not considered environmental justice guidelines, despite it fitting every category on the EPA's list. And so my project is looking specifically into Alabama, which is where I'm from, as 3 new prisons are being proposed in toxic lands. And I'm researching the histories of these lands with also a hopeful outlook of what successful organizing has been led by folks in California, Texas, and across the country to really get this on increased radar. And so that's a big part of my work, is looking at the problems in our prison system, but also the fundamental question of criminalization as an ecological injustice is a lot of my work towards those communities and towards our land. And then a big part of it is mapping where prisons are increasingly located. We've seen a shift within the last few decades of prisons moving from urban areas to rural isolated areas. I'm taking a sociological approach over this question of visibility and what that means as we, push incarcerated people outside of our purview. What does this mean for environmental and ecological justice? Thanks, y'all.
So you've already seen my face before, so I won't introduce myself again. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Human Rights Certificate Capstone course that's being taught by the wonderful Professor McLean, who is in the audience. So it's changed this year. In the past, it's been more of a traditional capstone courses, you might imagine, focusing on more individualized projects. But this year, we're actually doing a collective project covering the history of human rights in North Carolina. And it's actually inspired in part by the Pauli Murray Center's Durham Civil and Human Rights Map. So if you don't know much about the Pauli Murray Center or their map, I highly encourage you to check it out. It's a great organization. And this is actually going to take the form of a story map, which is this digital storytelling software. It allows you to add all these different incredible interactive elements. You can add graphs and maps, you can add audiovisual materials, things like that. And so our class is taking on the time period after World War II, and we're each adding at least 3 events or individuals. And we're hoping that future capstone classes will add more and more events to the story map in hopes that we will eventually have a pretty comprehensive timeline about North Carolina human rights history. And some of the examples of different events and people that are on this map are the integration of UNC Chapel Hill. That is being done by a Robertson scholar who is in our class. State-sanctioned sterilization in North Carolina and eugenics movement. Ella Baker, as well as Reverend Barber and Moral Mondays. And we've decided that our audience is middle and high school students. And so that's how we're thinking about it when we are writing the text for this. And we're also hoping in general that it'll be a helpful resource for social studies teachers. And as you might imagine, we're currently in the process of searching through databases, the Rubenstein archives, looking at oral histories, reading through books. There's just this immense and rich research and information available, but at the same time, we're trying to deliver it in a really concise and engaging way. Of course, we will have supplemental information for educators so they can learn more, or they can teach their students more about specific events and people. But we still need it to be concise, right? And so we're currently using Beverly Sorrell's exhibit labels and interpretive approach to understand how to make an audience engage with this kind of text, because we really need to know, what do we have to do to keep people from scrolling away or just exiting out of the tab because that's way too much text, right? So we're still working on this, but if you're interested in seeing our final project, we are having a launch event on April 19th. So keep an eye out for that, and I hope to see you all there.
All right, I believe I'm up. Okay, even though I only have 180 seconds, since I believe I'm the last speaker, I wanted to take a moment to really thank the Student Advisory Board and the DHRC for pulling this great event together. My name is Maria Paz Rios, and I'm a senior majoring in mathematics and history. Almost exactly 1 year ago, on the weekend before spring break, I went on a primary source deep dive at the Rubenstein Library. Little did I know, but those would be my last moments on campus to this day. These Rubenstein sources led to my first truly original research work, which, under the mentorship of Professor Nancy McLean, was a thrilling experience. My work focuses on the underexplored domestic narrative and pivotal role of Guatemalan elites in understanding the history and consequences of the overthrow of President Jacobo Arbenz in the 1954 coup. Guatemala in the early 1950s was an agricultural nation. If you owned the land, you had the power. However, UFC ownership aside, only 2% of the Guatemalan population controlled over 70% of the workable land. The distribution of land ownership went hand in hand with the existing semi-feudal labor relations. Guatemalan Indians, who comprised the majority of the population, were forced to work under extremely oppressive conditions, which included routine human rights abuse. However, with no land to own, they had nowhere to go. Through his progressive 1951 land reform, President Arbenz dared to challenge this. Now, I don't expect anyone to be familiar with 1950s Guatemalan land reform, so I'll discuss the main points. The decree only targeted the interests of the UFC and about 300 Guatemalan families led by ultra-wealthy coffee barons. It also included agricultural credit programs, which equipped Guatemalan Indians with the right tools for success. The land reform was bold, but it was also fair. The first 2 years were a success. Production and exports rates rose, and Indian communities got a brief taste of citizenship. However, landowning elites quickly realized that the empowerment of Indians threatened long-standing social, land, and labor privileges. The Guatemalan elite's ideological lexicon did not include Indian rights, and they could not imagine a world where it did. This led to a violent crusades. Landlords burned the shacks of Indians and drove them off plantations. They struck at peasant organizations by shooting, hanging, or beating suspected agitators. They also owned the newspapers, naturally, and constantly published false, defamatory material. Elites had a stellar relationship with the Catholic Church and leveraged church mechanisms to plant seeds of doubt and fear among rural Indians. Even though foreign intervention was the definitive blow to Arbenz's administration, in their crusade against Arbenz, local elites really set the stage for the coup. They opened the gates to Guatemala. For the UFC, the land reform was about profit. For Guatemalan landing elites, the land reform was about much more than just land. It was about race, rights, power, and privilege. So I actually wrote this paper in my hometown of Bogota, Colombia. Our story too has been plagued by foreign intervention, and so my work's conclusion carried even more personal meaning. In nations that have been subject to forceful intervention from global powers, we focus on externalizing blame and assigning guilt to the obvious foreign culprits. But it is equally important to increase national introspection and be critical of the internal forces that acted as foreign accomplices, directly or indirectly. Maybe then we will be able to start holding all of the right parties accountable as we attempt to accurately understand and, most importantly, learn from the histories of our skewed societies. Thank you.
Wow, I just want to give another thank you to the students and alumni who presented today. This was wonderful. I am so in awe and so impressed by all the research that is being done by people around me that I didn't even know was being done. So that's wonderful. And also just the great work that's being done by our alumni. And thank you all to all the participants for coming out. And you can stay engaged with the Human Rights Center by following us on Instagram. And I think Emily also put some links in the chat for like some other ways to get involved, and you can look on our website for more events in the future. And thank you all so much for coming out. Bye, everyone.